I have three things for you today: an outrageous investment, outrageous returns, and outrageous reward. So today is the 33rd Sunday of Ordinary Time, which means that we are rapidly approaching the end of the liturgical year. Next Sunday is the Feast of the Christ the King, and the following Sunday, we already start a new year with Advent. So today, the last Sunday, we are wearing green. It's been a very long time. I'm a little sick of it. I'm sure you are. We are going to be moving on to something else very soon. But as we're approaching the end of the year, we're starting to hear these readings, the gospel readings about being ready for the Master's return. So today, we're confronted with an outrageous investment. The man in the gospel today entrusts his possessions to his servants as he goes on a long journey. These are his stewards. So it takes a lot of trust for you to entrust all of your possessions to other people to make sure that they get a return on those investments. All of these three servants are given talents. Now, what do we understand by talent? Today, you and me understand talent to mean some type of aptitude or ability. But back in Jesus' day, that's not what talent meant. Talent was a Greek word that was a unit of measurement, the highest unit of measurement in the Roman Empire. It was equivalent of about 6,000 days' wages. So if you had 1 talent of gold, for instance, then that was equivalent to about 15 to 20 years of manual labor working. That's a lot of money. Pretty outrageous, isn't it? And this man gives away a total of 8 of these talents, split among these 3 servants. The whole point behind this parable is Jesus is showing us that God also has a pretty outrageous investment in you and me. Look at all the things that we can accumulate. You have your money, you have your possessions, your intellectual capacities, your athletic abilities, your social influence over others, your time. You might consider all of those to be your talents. And we, as Christians, would call them as gifts from God. Everything's been given to us by God, and so it's meant to be used for the glorification of God. But you see, our culture today, 21st century America, does not see your talents as coming from God. Instead, they come from you. How many of you have ever heard of the phrase, I'm a self-made man, or I'm a self-made woman? How many of you have said that? We don't see ourselves very much today anymore as stewards of God's gifts. Instead, we see ourselves as owners of those gifts, that we can choose what to do with them. Some social scientists today say that for the first time in human history, today in 21st century America, we no longer look outside ourselves for meaning, for identity, and for our place in life. We used to look to our communities, to our families, to our social groups, to our religious institutions for meaning and how we should live our life. But now in 21st century America, we don't look outside. Instead, we now look inside. And scientists have an expression for this. It's called expressive individualism. Now, no one else can tell you who you are. No one else can define who you are. You are free of those restraints, and you are free to define yourself for how you see fit. That is our whole culture. That is the water that our young people drink today. It's continually fed to us. But doesn't that create an incredible burden on you and me to be an owner rather than a steward? If you aren't a steward of the gifts, but you are completely your own, you're completely autonomous from everybody else, then you have a responsibility that you may or may not be able to handle. Is it any wonder then how much confusion and anguish and unnecessary mental illness affect our young people today? They suffer because of the pressure of individualism that is put on them from the outside. And we can't handle that. It's too much for us. But if we are stewards of God's gifts, it means that we're not our own. We are an incredible investment from God, and we have incredible potential based on what God has given to us. But if that is the case, if it's the case that you and I are stewards and not owners of our gifts, then it means that now we're accountable to produce a return on that investment. This is where we get to outrageous returns. God expects from us a return on our investment. So I'm not in the business world. I am in the business world now, but I wasn't trained to be in the business world. But I do know that the way to create more wealth is to use your wealth to create wealth. If you get a check in the mail and the first thing that comes to your mind is, I'm going to go blow this check on a big screen TV. And if that's the case with every check that comes in, then you're not looking to a creating wealth with your wealth. Instead, you've taken all that wealth that's come in and you've just kind of blown it. You've destroyed that wealth because it can't create any more. But a smart investor knows how to take the wealth that he's been given and to put that in a stock market or put it into savings and create more wealth. That's the key to what Jesus is describing here. The third guy in the parable today does not see his talent as an investment from the master. Instead, he gets scared. He goes and gets lazy and he buries that talent, doesn't create anything new with it. And so the master says to him, if you weren't going to produce more wealth with it, if you weren't going to invest it, then at least you could have put it in the bank. At least passively create some type of interest on it. But you didn't even do that. You just went and buried the talent that I gave to you. When we don't see our talents as an investment from God, then we're going to do one of two things. We're either going to hold on tight to everything that we have, be stuck in that individualist mindset and say, I'm my own self-made man, it's mine. Or we're going to be like this fellow in the story, and we're going to bury that talent and never let it grow. Either way, we've lost our trust in God. And rather than seeing God as this business coach, so to speak, who's encouraging us to go and use our talents and to produce more, instead we get suspicious of God's motives. We see him as restraining and constrictive of our freedom, and we back away from him. But friends, the nature of the talents and gifts that you've been given, the nature of the gifts that you've been entrusted with is to produce more. God doesn't give dead things to living people. God gives living things to living people. And so if you have a living thing, what do living things do? They grow. If God gives you something that is living, it's meant to grow. To bury it as if it were dead makes no sense. One of the joys that I get as vocation director of the diocese is to have very close contact with our seminarians. These are the young men in formation who will be our future priests one day. When they first enter the seminary, they're a little younger, a little more immature, maybe shy, maybe struggling to be virtuous young men in a very difficult culture, and they're a little rough around the edges. But over time, you start to see these changes take place. Over time, they start to get challenged a little bit more. They experience that nudging to break them out of their shell and become more of a public person. They're confronted with their own weaknesses. They start to see, how can I grow from out of my weaknesses? So these young men become more confident, they're more convicted, and they recognize the talents that God has given to them. And now they take that living thing, that talent that God has given to them, and they make that grow over time. Because when you can produce a return on the investment that God has given to you, then God gives you a reward that far surpasses what you've given him. And that brings us to our outrageous reward. So God's given us an outrageous investment. He expects an outrageous return on that investment, but then he gives us even more, an outrageous reward. When I take a look at everything that I've been entrusted with, especially these last couple of years, I've received a lot from God. Lots of gifts, but also lots of responsibilities. And I will be judged based on the responsibilities that God has given to me. I've been incredibly blessed, and so for that reason, I've been challenged to grow, to take this living thing that God has entrusted to me, to take your financial contributions that you give to the parish and make sure that that's used prudently, to make sure that the spiritual lives of 1,200 people who come to Mass every weekend and hundreds more who we see occasionally, that those spiritual lives grow. But those are small matters in the eyes of God. Those are just small things, because in God's eyes, he has something so much bigger prepared for you and me, so much more that he's entrusted to us. As the master said in the parable, since you've been faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibility. Enter your master's joy. If you and I are faithful in the small things, then we receive the same joy from the Lord. And that brings us to what I think is the often overlooked character in the gospel today. We think of the guy who got 5 talents and made another 5, pretty smart investor. We look at the guy who just was lazy and buried his master's talent. But what about the middle guy? The one who only received 2. He could have easily looked at the guy with 5 and said, wait a minute, why'd you give him 5? He could have gotten salty and suspicious of the master, and he could have gone and buried his talent just like the lazy one. Said, what's the point? He's obviously playing favorites here. But no, he doesn't do that. The guy with 2 talents goes and he makes another 2. Friends, you and I can probably find ourselves in the situation of that second guy. We look at other people and you might say, look at all the great things they've been blessed with. Look at the saints of the church. Look at St. Mother Teresa. She was given probably 5 talents, or maybe even more than that. But yet, she produced so much more. You and I are given talents according to our ability, according to the power that we have to multiply. And it doesn't matter how much talent you've been given. What matters is that you produce a return on your investment. What matters is that you multiply that. Because you know what? The guy who got 2 and produced 2 more talents received the same joy, the same reward as the guy with 5 talents. You get the same reward for what you produce. Brothers and sisters, everything that we do, the small matters, those are the things that matter in the eyes of God. It's not the huge life decisions. It's the small things. You and I can be great in washing the dishes. We can be great going and dropping our kids off at school or practice. You and I can be great sitting at our desk for hours a day. I know what that's like, and wondering, how do I make this a holy moment here? We can do that. We can give God a return on the investment that he has given to us. It's the small matters that God has given us great responsibility. So friends, God has been outrageous to you and me. He's given us a lot. I think what we need to do is just take some time to sit with it. What has God given me? How has he been outrageous to me? How does he want me to be outrageous in my response? And so receive an outrageous reward. Amen.